Hey everybody, I am Kenya and welcome to my YouTube channel. So in today's video, I want to talk about the Mandate for Leadership Manual, aka Project 2025, and today I literally want to go over chapter 1. So believe it or not, the United States of America is approaching its 250th anniversary. So yes, you heard that correctly. As of 2025, the US of A will be roughly 250 years old. So as we get into chapter 1, which is titled White House Office, was written by Rick Dearborn. Rick Dearborn is an American governmental official and lobbyist. Rick Dearborn also served as the White House Deputy of Staff for Legislative Intergovernmental Affairs under the real estate investor Donald Trump between the years of 2017 and 2018, which he served less than a year.
I'm so excited to have this conversation, and there's endless topics to cover. So I'm going to jump in and ask you both just to give our viewers a little bit of background about yourself. Rick, you obviously served a long time on the Hill and then went over to the White House, as many of us Washington politicos do. How was that experience? What kind of experience did you bring from Capitol Hill to the White House, and how was that transition?
It was different. I'd worked in other White Houses before, not necessarily in the White House like Tevi in the Bush administration, but I'd worked at the Department of Energy as an Assistant Secretary of Congressional Affairs. But I had 30 years of experience in the Senate. I worked for 7 different senators, had been a chief of staff, a legislative director, had worked on, helped write a lot of legislation. I guess what helped me the most is I did have legislative affairs as one of the divisions that was under my supervision as a deputy chief of staff. I had a great legislative affairs team. Early on, it was really important for us to try to notch a lot of victories. I think it came in really handy, that legislative experience, the Senate experience, and the House experience that I got when I was in the Bush administration working with the House. I think that helped us with the Trump tax cut program in 2017. I was able, I think, really to use a lot of my experience and connectivity with folks on the Hill to try to help work with our legislative team to get that passed. But it was a very different White House. It ran differently. Tevi and I would probably be the first to tell you it was very different than a more buttoned up version of the Bush White House. And we can probably get into that here in a little bit too.
When we think about our government, we don't think about all the positions, all the moving parts that it takes to actually run the government, run certain parts of the government, you know? In chapter 1, we will be going over like the White House and the White House positions, or positions within the White House. So first things first, there are 3 branches of the federal government, which is the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So in short, the legislative branch makes the law, the executive branch enforces the law, and the judicial branch interprets the law. So in chapter 1, author Rick Dearborn discusses the different positions of the White House office, which is the executive branch. So the positions in the White House office falls under the executive branch of the government. So Dearborn writes, the Constitution gives the executive power to the president. It designates him as commander-in-chief and gives him the responsibility to take care that the laws will be faithfully executed. As stated a bit earlier, the executive branch enforces the law and includes the president, who can veto legislation and nominate federal agency heads and high court appointees. First things first, our current president, who is the 46th president of the United States of America, and our commander-in-chief is President Joseph Biden, and he did assume office on January 20th, 2021. So the tone and tempo of an administration are often determined on January 20th at the beginning of the presidential term. Therefore, the president will need to choose someone to help him or her to carry out his agenda on an everyday basis. This person will be the chief of staff and will be the first decision that the president will make in office. So the chief of staff is an assistant to the president, and the chief of staff will manage the staff of the White House and the executive office of the president. The chief of staff's first task will be to create the organizational chart for the White House. As of today, July 29th, when I'm filming it, the Chief of Staff under President Biden is Jeff Zients, who assumed this position on February 8th, 2023. Now, since the Chief of Staff is the most senior position in the White House office, the President appoints Deputy Chiefs of Staff to assist the Chief of Staff. So under the Chief of Staff, we'll have the Deputy Chief of Staff. Deputy Chief of Staff is in charge of decision-making, organizational structure, and information flow. At the moment, there are 3 Deputy Chiefs of Staff in office as of today, July 29th, 2024. So first there is Annie Tomasini, and she is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, and she assumed office on February 9th, 2024. Then there is Bruce Reed, and he is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, and he assumed office on January 20th, 2021. Lastly, there is Natalie Killian, and she is Deputy Chief of Staff for Implementation, and she assumed office on February 8th, 2023. So next, the President has a host of senior advisors. So senior advisors are also known as Caesars, and they are appointed to offer broad guidance on political matters and communication issues. So there are several senior advisors. We have Tom Perez, who is the senior advisor for intergovernmental affairs. We have Stephen Benjamin, he is a senior advisor for public engagement. Then we have Gene Sterling, he is a senior advisor for the American Rescue Plan. And then we have John Podesta, he is the senior advisor for international climate policy. We have Annie Tomasini. She is also a senior advisor to the President and the White House office, as well as a Deputy Chief of Staff, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. Then we have Anita Dunn, and she is the senior advisor for communications. Now, there have been several other senior advisors during President Joe Biden's term, but at the moment, these are the senior advisors who are currently advising the President. Then there is the White House Counsel, and the White House Counsel provides legal advice on how to promote the President's agenda within the bounds of the law, which is very important. So they serve as a liaison for communications between the White House and the Department of Justice. The current White House Counsel is Ed Siskel. Next, there is a staff secretary who manages and oversees the clearance process for the President's daily and nightly briefing book. The staff secretary also oversees the use of the President's signature, whether by hand or by auto pen, and manages the Office of the Executive Clerk, Office of Records Management, and Office of Presidential Correspondence. The Office of the Staff Secretary has been described as the last substantive control point before papers reach the Oval Office. So the Oval Office is just basically the office that the President basically does all his work in, supposedly, you know. But before any paperwork reaches that Oval Office and reaches our President, the Staff Secretary's office is the last place it will go before it reaches the Oval Office. The current agency executive for the Office of Staff Secretary is Stephanie Feldman. Next, the Office of Communications has to convey the President's agenda to the public through various media outlets. So the office must work closely with the press office as well as the President's speechwriters and digital strategists. The current director of the Office of Communications is Ben LaBolt. Next, we have the Office of Legislative Affairs, or OLA, and they serve as a liaison between the White House office and Congress. Office of Legislative Affairs serves as a mediator amongst the political parties to find a common ground to carry out the President's agenda. The political parties meaning like Democrats, Republicans, independent parties, Green Party, if that is still a thing. So the director of the Office of Legislative Affairs is Shuwanza Golf. So the Office of Presidential Personnel, or PPO, their primary responsibility is to staff the executive branch with individuals who are equipped to implement the President's agenda. They have direct review and control of personnel files, including security clearance dossiers. The director is Gautam Raghavan, and the deputy director is Stacey Aigner. Now there is the Office of Political Affairs, or OPA, and they serve as a line of communication between the White House and the president's political party. Whatever political party that president is a part of, President Joe Biden will be a Democrat. Director of the Office of Political Affairs would be Amy Ruiz, and she would also have deputy directors under her, and they would be responsible for a certain geographical region of the country. So the deputy directors would be responsible for just their own regions across the country. So the Office of Cabinet Affairs, or OCA, they ensure the coordination of policy and communication between the White House and the Cabinet Office. The OCA coordinates all cabinet meetings with the president, and the director is Evan Ryan. The cabinet secretary also must maintain a direct relationship with all the members of the cabinet. So next there is the Office of Public Engagement, or OPE, and they build support for the president's agenda across every aligned social, faith-based, minority, and economic interest group. They would work with more external and internal parties than any other White House staffer. And the director is Steve Benjamin. So next we have the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, or IGA. They connect the White House office to the state, the county, the local, and even tribal governments. If you don't realize it, there are the Indian reservations across the country, and so also we have our Hawaiian territories and things of that nature as well. So the IGA also represents the interests and perspectives of non-federal government entities, but to make sure those entities understand the president's agenda and also supports it. And the director would be Tom Perez. Then we have the White House Policy Councils. So there are 3 White House councils, and each are headed by an assistant to the president. And they perform 3 functions, which is policy coordination, policy advice, and policy implementation. So the 3 White House councils, the first White House council would be the National Security Council, and they would advise and assist the president on national security and foreign policies. And the chairman is Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, and the National Security Advisor is Jake Sullivan. Then there is the National Economic Council. Their functions is to coordinate the economic policy making process with respect to domestic and international economic issues, also to coordinate economic policy advice to the president, also to ensure that policy decisions and programs are consistent with the president's stated goals and that those goals are being effectively pursued, and lastly, to monitor implementation of the president's economic policy agenda. We have Domestic Policy Council, and this consists of advisors to the president on the non-economic domestic policy issues as well as international issues with a significant domestic component, such as immigration. And the director is Neera Tanden. All 3 White House councils are responsible for policy coordination, policy advice, and policy implementation, as I mentioned a little bit already. So as far as policy coordination, the primary role of the Policy Council is to coordinate the development of administration policy. Then for policy advice, that has the 3 policy councils will also function as independent policy advisors to the president. Then for policy implementation, the policy councils also manage and mediate the implementation of previous policy decisions, implementation of a new statute or an executive order frequently takes years and involves many distinct and more granular policy decisions along the way. With the White House policy councils that I just mentioned, the National Security Council, National Economic Council, and the Domestic Policy Council, there are subsidiary, am I saying that right? There are like subsidiary or sub councils beneath those councils that help to carry out the president's agenda. These are mostly like smaller committees. So the Policy Coordinating Committee, or PCC, so their main purpose is to determine where consensus exists, clearly identify where there are differing opinions, and develop options for resolving the remaining questions that the committees may have. So then there is a Deputies Committee, or DC, and it evaluates the options produced by the Policy Coordinating Committee and frequently directs the PCC to add, expand, or reevaluate an option or even to reach a compromise and resolve an issue at that level. Basically with them, when questions are not resolved by the Deputies Committee, this is the final opportunity for the President's most senior advisors to discuss the question, make sure that each principal's position is carefully understood, and then they will meet with the President for a final decision. So as far as the White House policy councils, whatever issues or things that they have, it goes through the Policy Coordinating Committee, then down to the Deputies Committee, and then finally to the Principals Committee before it makes its way to the Oval Office and to the President. All right, so now we have Office of the Vice President, or OVP, and that will be Vice President Kamala Harris, who is currently running for president. So in modern U.S. history, the Vice President has acted as a significant advisor to the President. Once elected, the VP helps to promote and in many instances puts into place and executes the President's agenda. Of course, with the Chief of Staffs and the Deputy Chiefs of Staffs and all the myriad of positions in the White House that helps the President complete his agenda. So recent presidents have decided to give vice presidents space in the West Wing of the White House, whereas the President mainly stays in the East Wing, if you didn't know. And then there is the Office of the First Lady or First Gentleman, okay? And the First Lady or First Gentleman plays an interesting role in the formation, implementation, and execution of policy in concert with the President. One advantage of the first spouses taking on hot button social issues is that any political backlash will be less severe than it would be on the President. Interesting. And so the Office of the First Lady currently would be Dr. Jill Biden. Yes, put some respect on her name, Dr. Jill Biden, okay? And so past like East Wing initiatives or First Ladies of the presidency have focused on, you know, smaller issues such as combating bullying, fighting, and drug abuse. Not to minimize drug abuse, that's a lot. Promoting literacy and encouraging physical education for young adults and children. I hope I was able to go over the White House office positions quickly. I hope that it was clear enough for each of you to understand exactly what each position of the White House actually did. And I will see you in my next video. We will go over chapter 2, which will be the Executive Office of the President of the United States, written by Russ Vought. Okay, so if you made it to the end of this video, I would like to thank you guys for coming to kick it with me today. Hit the thumbs up button, and yes,